and welcome to the PFF Wire podcast. I'm Doug Kyed, joined as always by Brad Spielberger. Brad, how are you doing on this fine Monday afternoon?
Yeah, well, I made my debut on the forecast yesterday, and they start the show after Sunday Night Football begins. So I was up until about 2 a.m., but besides that, doing well. And I think, like I said before the show, great hair day for the pod today.
It really is. Yeah, I don't know what's going on here, but we did something right. It was a crazy day of football on Sunday. We will get to that in a second. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the PFF Wire podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure to rate and review. Let's start off with some of the biggest news of the week on Sunday. Like I mentioned, Kenny Pickett got in the game for the Steelers, and he was certainly good from a quarterback sneak perspective. I was tweeting about that quite a bit. Ran for a couple of touchdowns. I'm not sure how much we can glean off of this performance with him replacing Mitchell Trubisky, but I thought it was interesting, at least, that he got into this game against the New York Jets. Steelers still wound up losing, but very tough slate ahead if Kenny Pickett's going to stick as the starting quarterback for the Steelers, which is something that Mike Tomlin did not confirm after the game.
Yeah, and I think it's fair. I mean, you look at their schedule going forward. Buffalo next week, maybe the worst debut for a rookie, against this defense. And then Tampa Bay is the week after that. There's a couple other tough games beyond those as well. But I think you had to make this decision. Mitchell Trubisky's 5.5 yards per attempt was 38th out of 39 quarterbacks this season with at least 10 attempts. Very small sample size, but Pickett actually now leads the NFL with 9.2 yards per attempt on his 13 passes. Didn't have a single ball hit the ground because he threw 3 interceptions. And completed 10 passes. Interestingly enough, though, all 3 interceptions we did not deem as turnover-worthy plays per PFF charting. One was a Hail Mary at the end of the game. 2 others went off receivers' hands. I think you can nitpick, but I watched the film this morning. I also understand why the graders went that way. I think it's kind of a toss-up, and drops are a tough stat. They vary company to company oftentimes. Yeah. But I thought Pickett added some flash, and I think at this point you got to ride with him.
Yeah, it's tough because obviously, like we said, the upcoming slate for the Steelers is tough, but this was kind of the game to get him in there. Maybe it was even the right kind of situation. Obviously, the Steelers would have liked to have won this game, but Jets are now 2-2 on the season. Zach Wilson was out there for the Jets. Maybe we can get into some of the 2021 quarterbacks now that we're talking about this game. He looked fine. Certainly wasn't his worst performance. He had some up and down moments in that game, but overall, he was probably one of the better quarterbacks from that 2021 draft class. This week, Trevor Lawrence went back to really struggling. Obviously, Mac Jones out with a high ankle sprain, Trey Lance out, and now Davis Mills is actually our highest graded quarterback from that class after Trevor Lawrence's struggles. So still not seeing the consistency that we might have expected out of that 2021 draft class. You could probably speak a little better to Justin Fields' performance, but statistically and grade-wise, still not what you're looking for out of Justin Fields this week.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And Zach Wilson, real quick, I mean, he just kind of showed us what he's always shown, which there were some great passes. He was actually phenomenal in the fourth quarter, but had 4 turnover-worthy plays, 3 of them on throws, one where he held onto the ball way too long and could have lost it by a fumble. Speaking of Justin Fields, they both now are averaging 3.4 seconds on their average time to throw, which is the highest in the NFL, and is just way too long. So, yeah, I mean, with Fields, that is part of it. There's no question about it, but I did post a graph today, a couple hours ago. The Bears have allowed the highest pressure percentage in the NFL. The Jets are actually third. And the Bears receivers are deemed the least open group in the NFL. The Jets are much better there. They have a good receiving core. And Wilson was able to find some guys open. So that's kind of the boost for the Jets and for Zach Wilson. But, yeah, I mean, both guys just do not have protection. Jets right guard Elijah Vera Tucker played 44 snaps at left tackle in that game because that's how dire their tackle situation has gotten. So credit to him for pulling off that win. And, Pittsburgh without TJ Watt, but still a solid defense. And, obviously Mike Tomlin running that ship there.
Yeah, and Elijah Vera Tucker actually did play a decent amount of left tackle at USC during his college career. I remember Patriots were interested in him coming out of that draft. They wound up getting Mac Jones because Elijah Vera Tucker was drafted 1 pick before Mac Jones. But I was kind of thinking at the time that they might have been looking at him as a left tackle rather than a guard. So not the worst option, but it's interesting that it took this to get Elijah Vera Tucker into the game at left tackle because Max Mitchell now injured. Doesn't seem like that's going to be a season-ending injury, but just so many injuries there on the offensive line for the Jets. Seems like they might be able to get Dwayne Brown back this week, at least in practice. Robert Saleh, the Jets head coach, did not rule that out in a press conference. He said they'd see where they're at on Wednesday with that. So that would certainly help to get a player that they signed to a 2-year, $20 million contract back. But on the Bears side, they lost the New York Giants. New York Giants now 3-1 on the season. And I was doing some digging on some stats. Dexter Lawrence, the Giants' first-round defensive tackle from a few years ago, had 8 pressures against Justin Fields in that game. That is tied for the most by a interior defensive lineman or any defensive player who weighs over 320 pounds. I was digging through the stats because I first saw that Dexter Lawrence had 8 total pressures. I was like, wow, that is a lot for a guy who's a nose tackle. And I was like, oh, wow, he's tied for the most out of any player who's over 330 pounds. And I was like, let's bring that down by 10 pounds. It was also tied for the most by any defensive player over 320 pounds. So, yeah, major issues there on the offensive line for the Bears. And Cody Whitehair could miss some time as well. So things are not getting better for Justin Fields there in Chicago.
Folks, this is why you listen to PFF Wire for weight-adjusted pressure rate for interior defensive linemen. That's what it's all about. No, it's a great shout, though. Sam Mustard for the Bears center had a 1.5 pass block grade. There have been zeros. I got a couple questions. That's the lowest I've ever seen. There have been a few zeros in our day, but allowed 6 pressures, was just getting abused all game long. And with Cody Whitehair out, head coach Matt Eberflus confirmed he'll be out for an extended period of time. So Mustard going nowhere, and Lucas Patrick probably now kicking over to left guard, and Tevin Jenkins can stay at right guard, which I know some fans will be happy about. But, yeah, things are not getting any easier anytime soon in Chicago.
It was a pretty fun Patriots-Packers game this weekend. Bailey Zappi, the Patriots' 4th-round pick quarterback, came in very early in the game because Brian Hoyer suffered a concussion. And, I mean, Zappi was fine. The Patriots actually took the Packers to overtime, which was pretty amazing. I thought there was kind of a lack of interest maybe from Aaron Rodgers during the first half of this game. He was something like 4 of 11, did not look like himself. He really turned it on in the second half and then into overtime. But yeah, I mean, it was a pretty impressive performance from Bailey Zappi. I think it only wound up with like a 51 PFF grade. But, and if you're talking about a quarterback who entered the season 3rd string, didn't get a ton of reps during training camp, played a decent amount during preseason, but then once the season starts, Patriots only really allow starters to practice. So I think that Bailey Zappi was probably only getting scout team reps, and he was probably splitting those with Brian Hoyer through the first 3 weeks of the season. Then his practice reps obviously increased this week with Mac Jones out. But I don't know. I feel like this was obviously kind of one of those moral type victories for the Patriots. I know that they don't really look at it that way, but I would say that this game was, if anything, a little bit more concerning for the Packers than anything for the Patriots.
Yeah, I mean, the Packers continue to pour resources. They've added Jaron Reed on the interior. They obviously drafted Devontae Wyatt in the first round out of Georgia, another interior defender. They drafted linebacker Quay Walker, re-signed a bunch of guys on defense, and they still have the 3rd worst EPA per rush allowed. That's what's knocked them out of the playoffs the last 3 years in a row is San Francisco or another team just running the ball down their throat, controlling the clock, and keeping Aaron Rodgers on the sideline. And New England did that again with Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson. That was funny. They kind of had the kid gloves on Zappi, had the training wheels on, but he was 5 for 5 on passes, 10+ yards downfield, including that touchdown ball to Devontae Parker. So maybe they let him open up a little bit. They are favored against the Detroit Lions next week with, Brian Hoyer concussion question marks or Bailey Zappi. Maybe that's Vegas telling us.
Or Mac Jones.
Yeah, maybe that's Vegas telling us I guess true. I guess maybe Mac Jones could return. That's a fair point. But yeah, I just thought that was interesting nonetheless, that even with those question marks, coming off an overtime game against Green Bay, they're favored against, the Lions are 1-3, but obviously, a plucky Lions team.
Yeah, a very plucky Lions team. We'll get into that in a second. But certainly the kid gloves were on Bailey Zappi. I will say on the touchdown pass they had Devontae Parker, they were like 3 seconds past a delay of game when they actually got that playoff. It was so weird. And that came, I think, one play after they also had a delay of game. And then just worth a shout, Patriots rookie cornerback Jack Jones, another 4th-round pick, and an extremely high coverage grade. I think it was 94.6, something like that. One of the best coverage grades for a rookie cornerback in a single game since PFF has been around since 2006. He had a pick 6 against Aaron Rodgers. He also forced and recovered a fumble. So big game for Jack Jones when he was stepping in for Jalen Mills. Jalen Mills was a game-time decision, did not wind up suiting up, so Jack Jones started opposite Jonathan Jones. So good performance from him. But let's talk about that Lions team that the Patriots are playing next week. The Lions now have the most total points through week 4 in NFL history. Somehow they've allowed more points than they have scored, and they're 1-3 on the season. I think that, I mean, I've got a good friend who's a Lions fan. He texts me about the Lions all the time. I just feel so bad because, like, they're that team that is just perpetually so close, like keeping games close, almost winning, and then teams are constantly snatching victory away from defeat for them. And it's just, it's unbelievable that this Lions team has scored as many points as they have, and that they're 1-3 on the season. And they've had a lot of injuries on the offensive side of the ball as well. I think a lot of people expected that defense to be a strength this year, with Aaron Glenn being a head coaching candidate elsewhere. I know that Lions fans are kind of starting to lose faith in him a little bit right now. I don't fully blame them just because of this performance so far this season.
Yeah, dead last in EPA per play allowed on defense. If I told you that Jared Goff would lead all quarterbacks with 12 touchdown passes, Jamal Williams would lead all running backs with 6 touchdowns on the ground, and they would be 1-3, you'd probably be like, how is that even possible? Yeah, I mean, I think it's always one-score games, too. We talk a ton about one-score regression. It's something you're always eventually going to see, and Detroit just cannot stop losing these one-score games. Yeah, I will say, though, to spin it as a positive, you mentioned all the guys they're missing. They still scored 45 points. Yes, right. The Seahawks defense stinks, but Amon-Ra St. Brown, DJ Chark, kind of a game-time decision not to play. They still had Hawkinson and Jamal Williams, and that was enough. Maybe that inspires confidence. That offensive line is obviously a stout, good unit, even with some depth when they're hurt. Hang your hat on that, I suppose, and hopefully, fix that defense, and that's what you need going forward. But just, it's tough that they're 1-3. Those fans deserve a 500 football team at the least right now.
Yeah, I mean, I really can't blame them for just like the moral victories. I think they're tired of moral victories at this point. They're tired of having things to hang their hat on at this point. And yeah, you feel bad for them. But yeah, Jared Goff had a good game, 74.6 overall PFF grade, and that was, as you mentioned, without DJ Chark, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and DeAndre Swift. So still able to score points. And I will say that defense, that Lions defense, will really be tested to see how many points that they can actually let up against this Patriots offense this week, especially if it is Brian Hoyer playing quarterback, whether it's Bailey Zappi playing quarterback. Even Mac Jones and the Patriots offense have not got a lot going on offense so far this season. So it's like that movable object against the
inverse of it.
The stoppable force versus the movable object.
Right.
We'll see which one winds up prevailing. Let's talk about the Carolina Panthers quarterback situation, because there's really not much that they can do right now. But Baker Mayfield is our lowest graded qualified quarterback through 4 weeks of the season. I personally was expecting Baker Mayfield to play much better this year than he has. I think that this just goes to systemic issues with the Carolina Panthers offense, whether that's Matt Rule, whether it's Ben McAdoo, that seemingly feels like anyone could be playing quarterback in this offense and they would still struggle. Because, I mean, the craziest thing to me is that Sam Darnold was so bad for the Panthers last season, wound up, I think, having like a 51 grade, 52 grade, something like that. And Baker Mayfield has somehow been even worse. The issue here, though, for the Panthers is that Sam Darnold reportedly not close from returning at this point. So they're basically forced to stick with Baker Mayfield, since, the other option at this point would be PJ Walker. They also drafted Matt Corral, but he's also out for the season at this point. So yeah, not a lot of options for the Panthers to turn to here.
I'm not sure that there's a lot of solace in Sam Darnold being an option to turn to nonetheless.
I know.
He has, Baker Mayfield leads the NFL in tipped passes. I want to say he had 3 or 4 in yesterday's game alone, and has either 9 or 10 total on the year, which is the most of any quarterback. That often gets tied to height. It's not just a height thing, but he's also just so inaccurate. You watch some of these throws, missing DJ Moore open a couple times yesterday, just looks so uncomfortable. And then you mentioned how it's consistent. I actually broke down this morning. They've had, they had Joe Brady. They had, when he was fired for half the season, they had another offensive coordinator. Obviously now Ben McAdoo. I spliced their offense with every different play caller. It doesn't matter. They're just awful. No. They're a bottom 5 offense. It's particularly passing the ball. Obviously Christian McCaffrey can sometimes give them some great rushing results, but just bad. And they have talent at certain spots. Yeah. You just wonder why they cannot right the ship. But I also saw a stat from Tom Pelissero, 1-26 when the opposing team scores 17 points. That's a stat that should come in from like 1950, not 2022. That's about as bad as it gets.
Yeah, it's bad. Like as you mentioned, I mean they've got DJ Moore, they've got Christian McCaffrey, they've got Robbie Anderson, they've got some talent on there. They just drafted Ika Makwanu. He hasn't been great this season, but he hasn't been a total disaster. It's just I don't know. They cannot figure it out for the life of them. We'll see. Really, at this point, how long Matt Rule can last. I certainly don't know if you should be firing a head coach after 4 weeks. This isn't the Big Ten, but it's I don't know. I mean. And I guess the other issue there would be who would take over at that point. I guess they do have, they do have Steve Wilkes on staff. They've got some experienced coaches on staff, but I don't know. Something eventually is going to have to change there. Let's go through some injuries from week 4 because unfortunately there was quite a bit of them. The biggest one coming out of week 4, Denver Broncos running back Javonte Williams has he suffered multiple ligament damage, tore his ACL, tore other ligaments. That means that this isn't only necessarily a season-ending injury. This could carry on into next year as well because we just saw it with J.K. Dobbins. He suffered multiple ligament damage during the preseason last year, was not able to get back onto the field until week 3 of this season. So we're already at week 4. I don't know. This is tough for Javonte Williams. And it's another tough blow for the Broncos offense overall, which lost Tim Patrick during the offseason. We were expecting them to really have the best weapons or some of the best weapons in the NFL. And now they've got 2 really big pieces down with ligament damage.
Yeah, it's a brutal, like you said, not only the injury itself is brutal, but yeah, he's 6th in targets among running backs so far this year with 21. Has been a safety valve, a much needed safety valve for Russell Wilson, and has created a lot after the catch. Going back to last season, his rookie year, he leads all running backs in missed tackles forced per rushing attempt. With about 1 every 3 carries, he's making a defender miss. So he's a dynamic player. He's a good young player. Obviously, they traded up in the 2nd round to get him. They do have Melvin Gordon. They brought him back, and that obviously, even though he now has, I want to say, 4 fumbles in his last 12 games, had a pivotal, maybe game-losing fumble in this game against the Raiders. But a solid, capable backup if he can hold on to the football. But just more bad news in Denver. You mentioned Tim Patrick, Javonte Williams, Randy Gregory actually did go down in that game as well. I don't think we have news there yet, and probably not season-ending, but a lingering knee injury that's been bothering him. I think that's what he re-aggravated in the game yesterday. So 2-2 Broncos. They play on Thursday as well, which I'm sure we'll get to. But yeah, just more bad news in Denver, and that offense is still just relatively anemic.
Yeah, Melvin Gordon has a 44.1 PFF grade so far this season and a 17.2 fumble grade. He cannot seemingly hang on to the football right now. And everyone expected that to be a 2-headed monster this season, obviously, for the Broncos at running back. And that has not been the case, or that will not be the case moving forward here. And I'm not sure how much the Broncos can really trust Melvin Gordon if those fumble issues continue. Let's get into another running back, Jonathan Taylor. He's got an ankle injury. Doesn't really seem serious from some of the reports out there, but the Colts are playing on Thursday. They've already ruled out linebacker Shaquille Leonard with a concussion. So this is a short turnaround now for Jonathan Taylor.
I think it is the 2 most disappointing teams of the NFL season going at it. Not making late the injuries. The teams overall so far through week 4 have just been poor and just have not, on both sides of the ball, really have not been super impressive. The Broncos defense has been solid. So Indianapolis at Denver without Shaq Leonard. I think even though Jonathan Taylor is not going to be out for maybe an extended period of time, I would be shocked. It sounds like maybe a high ankle. I'd be shocked if he plays on Thursday. Well, he was 20 carries, 42 yards, and a fumble in that game. They could do nothing on the ground, even with him. But obviously, a team that lacks a lot of weapons to begin with, just the last thing you need in Indianapolis, going into Denver where you can run the football generally.
Another game early next week. We've got another 9:30 a.m. game between the New York Giants and the Green Bay Packers. Giants quarterback Daniel Jones has what Brian Daboll called an ankle sprain. Not sure if that's a low ankle sprain, a high ankle sprain. Taylor has concussion. He's still in concussion protocol. So right now, the only fully healthy quarterback on the Giants roster is Davis Webb, who is obviously with Brian Daboll with the Buffalo Bills. I believe that Brian Daboll said that they'll probably have to work out some quarterbacks. I think the Patriots will probably have to work out some quarterbacks as well, since their only healthy quarterback right now is Bailey Zappi. So it's a good time to be one of those free agent quarterbacks out there because you're probably getting a lot of work during these workouts. But the Giants are 3-1. They're facing a Packers team that's 3-1, but Giants won't be 3-1 for long if Daniel Jones isn't out there.
I'm not sure they'll be 3-1 even if Daniel Jones
Yeah.
is out there. But yeah, that's a good point. A lot of quarterback injuries across the NFL. Josh Johnson, keep your volume on your phone. Try to get that 19th team to sign you, whatever you're at these days. Heading out to London. Injuries to both of their quarterbacks. Saquon Barkley was basically a wildcat QB in the fourth quarter against Chicago, which sadly worked better than it should have. Green Bay has some injuries of their own. Jair Alexander did not play for them this past week, but I think it's a big-time get-right spot for Green Bay. And I think the Giants look more like a 3-2 football team. We have right now they're fifth worst in pressures allowed on Daniel Jones, have the most penalties in the NFL. Just you look at every underlying metric. Their success rate on offense is 22nd. They're not a good football team. They are 3-1, but they've beaten Carolina, Chicago, and week 1 Tennessee. I guess we'll give them a decent win there, but not an impressive 3-1 team by any stretch.
Yeah, I will give them credit for making some improvements on that team. However, though, I think they were 32nd last year in EPA per play. Now they're 15th or 16th, so they're at least average now. And same thing goes on defense. I think they were like 24th on EPA per play against, and this season I think they're 13th in that metric. So they've got massive flaws on their roster. They can't really throw the ball. They've got a lot of holes on defense as well, but making things work against some other lower tier teams, and their schedule gets a little bit tougher here coming up. Obviously the Packers are tough, but they don't exactly have the most difficult division because they do still have to play the Washington Commanders a couple of times. They've got the Jacksonville Jaguars, Seattle Seahawks, Houston Texans, Detroit Lions. So, there's a path here for them to still finish around 500 or better, just given what they've already done this year and then what the schedule looks like in front of them. Let's talk about another one of those teams in the division that I just mentioned, the Washington Commanders. Brian Robinson, great story. Clock is starting on him returning to practice, despite the fact that he was shot twice on August 28th in an attempted robbery. Unbelievable that, he was shot, I think it was in the hip and in the leg, that, missed major muscles and ligaments and arteries and everything like that. For him to already be back at practice, the clock is going to start on him, so he could be back soon. Ron Rivera said that. He also said that Chase Young, their star defensive end, clock will not be starting on him quite yet. He will not be returning to practice. And they've got a wide receiver, Jahan Dotson, their first round pick this year, could miss some time with a hamstring injury. So good news for Brian Robinson. And actually, once he gets back on the field, it looks like he could actually have a pretty decent role, because Antonio Gibson, I think, only played 41% of snaps, something like that last week. That was way down from his snap percentage entering the season.
It's his lowest this week of any week so far this year. Yeah, it's a good shout. And obviously it's going to get probably even lower with Robinson returning. Look, they took him in the third round out of Alabama. They think he's a true 3-down back. I think during the draft, there were some people kind of chuckling, saying it was a reach and they took him too early and all those type of things. But I think they clearly believe in him, and they obviously want to get him going behind this offensive line, and just losing faith in Gibson. So, yeah, I think he's going to come in, which is truly a remarkable story, come in and maybe have a decent share of the workload right out of the gate. The loss of Dotson is a big-time deal, though. They need those three receivers to space things out. Wentz is obviously struggling regardless. They're bottom 10 in EPA per play on offense, bottom 10 on defense and dead last on offense. So they are struggling mightily. And Dotson had 4 touchdowns on his first 10 catches, so was remarkably efficient out of the gate. The last thing they need is to start getting injuries to key players like him.
Yeah, it's been a tough season for the Commanders so far. And if there's one thing that I got right heading into the season, I was trying to figure out why people were relatively high on the Washington Commanders. And I think we've kind of, proven that that has not been the case so far this season. But we'll see if they can turn things around. Let's stick in the DMV area. Baltimore Ravens also getting some good news, and that's Gus Edwards. Clock will start on him returning from the PUP list. It does not necessarily mean that he will play right away, but coming off of his own torn ACL, they've already seen J.K. Dobbins return. Now they could get Gus Edwards back in the offense. Also, wide receiver Rashad Bateman, who's had some big plays so far this season, has what they called a mid-foot injury, but that doesn't seem overly serious at this point.
Yeah, they can't afford to lose Bateman, really. Duvernay has had a good season this year. Obviously, Mark Andrews in the fold, but you watch Lamar Jackson some of these games, and he just has to do so much. Running with his head cut off when Daniel Falele, their 4th-string left tackle, going up against the Bills this week. And good start in the first half. Obviously couldn't do anything in the second half, had 2 interceptions. Not fully absolving him of blame, but he needs more support and help around him. I think Gus Edwards would be a big help. Him and Dobbins as a 1-2 punch is a good duo, kind of differing skill sets and bring different things to the table. Baltimore now 2 tough losses in a row, and now they get Cincinnati at home this next upcoming week, a massive, massive Week 5 matchup for both Baltimore and Cincinnati.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Lamar Jackson, he's got a 76.2 overall PFF grade so far this season, but only a 68.6 passing grade. And I think that a lot of that is the weapons around him. Losing Rashad Bateman would be big. I'm curious to get your take on this. Quarterbacks have been all over the place so far this season. Like, if you're looking at our PFF grades so far this year, obviously there's a limited sample size for some of these guys, but the top 5 graded overall quarterbacks: Geno Smith, number 1, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, number 4, and then Andy Dalton, number 5. And you go down to Tua Tagovailoa, Jacoby Brissett. Then you've got Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Lamar Jackson. I don't know. It seems like the quarterbacks that we expected to perform really well this season have really been putting out some up and down performances. And that's allowed some of these guys like Geno Smith and Andy Dalton and Jalen Hurts and Tua to kind of rise up in the ranks. Do you see anything specific that's forcing quarterbacks to struggle a little bit more this season, or just not play consistently? Or am I overreacting to this? And is this kind of always the way that quarterbacks grade early in the season?
No, I don't think you're overreacting at all, both on an individual level and also just in general. The grades are lower. And it's also, we've noticed big time throws are way down across the board. I think it goes back to teams just playing more and more 2 high shells with 2 deep safeties and just taking away a lot of the vertical concepts for opposing offenses. And so now I think that, the thing with Patrick Mahomes, and I think we saw it last night against Tampa Bay, where I think he had completions to 9 different receivers. It wasn't a ton of downfield stuff. It was a lot of over the middle, going through your progression, intermediate throws, stuff like that. I think a lot of these quarterbacks now that rely on the boom or bust nature, the Russell Wilson, I think we talked about him before, that's gone now. Defenses are taking that away because they've realized the explosive pass is killing us. We'd rather die by 1,000 paper cuts, so to speak, and let them chip away, because eventually we think the opposing offense will make a mistake or turn the ball over or, be behind the sticks, whatever the case may be. And I think that's it. I think it is a defensive correction to just coverage mattering more and just focusing so much on taking away the pass.
Yeah, it's certainly been fascinating to see. And I think it is a lot of those 2 high shells. It's a lot of cover 2. You see some quarters defense in there as well. I'm interested to kind of run the numbers to see how different that is from years past, but that is taking a lot away from a lot of those big time throws, a lot of those downfield passes, because if you got 2 safeties deep, then you're going to have to kind of chip away at the middle of the field and the shallow parts of the field. So I think that is a lot of what we're seeing so far. I just mentioned Tua Tagovailoa. Mike McDaniel got out ahead of things, said that Tua will not play this week. It's going to be Teddy Bridgewater. I think that they kind of had to do this from an optics standpoint. I think that there's probably a possibility that since that game was on Thursday, Tua probably could clear concussion protocol by Sunday if this was a normal circumstance. But I think that you do have to deal in optics. And I think that you have to be extra safe with Tua, if he did suffer a concussion 2 weeks in a row there.
I think you and I, to a degree, have seen how the sausage is made and maybe know a little bit more behind the scenes. And also, I would say, though, are not big cynics and don't think the NFL is some evil enterprise and generally tries to do the right thing. But I do agree where, let's say Sunday, week 3 against Buffalo Sunday is out of the picture. If all we had was this Thursday against Cincinnati, I agree. I think we probably do see him play against the Jets in week 5. Of course, I don't know how bad it was, but he did fly home that night, was unfortunately subjected to MacGruber. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's not a conspiracy theory. I think it's a legitimate thing to bring up. It's a big deal though, too. I mean, the Jets are small home dogs now. It's a field goal against the Dolphins. That is an AFC East matchup. Actually, crazy thing. Well, if the Buffalo loses and the Jets win, I think the Jets could lead the AFC East after week 5. Because the Bills lost to the Dolphins. Sorry, my brain just went places, but that would be a lot of fun.
That would be fun.
Yeah, no, it's a big loss, but I think Teddy was solid, in relief, and I think you do better as a quarterback when you obviously the full game plan prepared for you on a full week, or in this case, an extended week. I don't think it's a massive downgrade. At the same time, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are currently first and second in fantasy points for receivers, first and second in yards per route run. Just ridiculous production so far. I think that'll probably fall off if they lose Tua for a week or two.
Yeah, it's tough. I think that, yeah, Teddy stepped in pretty well on Thursday. Curious to see what he looks like with now a week and a half worth of preparation. I think that I think this will be a better test to see how much of this offense is Mike McDaniel and how much Tua is really contributing on his own than it was last week when Teddy had to come in midway through that game. So I'm, once again, very curious to see how that looks. I'm also a little bit surprised by the line in that game because I still think the Dolphins are the much more talented team, a better coach team, everything, but we'll see how that all winds up. One last piece of news: Cordarrelle Patterson, Falcons running back, going to injured reserve. Doesn't sound like it's going to be a long-term issue, but he will miss at least 4 games. Falcons actually still had a lot of success on the ground with Caleb Huntley, Tyler Algier, with Cordarrelle Patterson out of that game.
Yeah, and Damian Williams, I want to say, was placed on IR in week 1, or right after week 1. So I think he'll miss this game and then be eligible to return next game. So they do have some reinforcements. I think the best thing for them is, as great as Cordarrelle Patterson has been, he's 4th in rushing grade for us right now. The Falcons are number 1 in yards before contact per rushing attempt. And that's a credit to head coach Arthur Smith and his scheme, as well as, of course, the offensive line doing some good work up front. So it is a massive loss. He has been great for them. But at the same time, I think they do a good job scheming guys open. Algier was very productive when he did come in and play a lot more once Patterson went out. That offense has been humming. They're I want to say 4th in explosive rushes overall. It's a good offense, and credit to Arthur Smith. Huge matchup for them too against Tampa Bay next weekend.
Definitely. Let's get into Monday night's matchup. If you guys are listening to this after Monday, then feel free to just turn the podcast off. But very intriguing matchup between the Los Angeles Rams and the San Francisco 49ers. I was looking at PFF Green Line, trying to find an edge on this game. And the one that initially caught my eye was the point total on this game is only 42.5. You mentioned this before we started recording. That's actually dropped quite a bit during the week as well. So I don't know. Personally, I'd be hammering that over. I know that there's some issues on the offensive line on both sides of this game, but you've got Kyle Shanahan, you've got Sean McVay. You know that these guys are going to be throwing out their best at one another, and I just think that these offenses are still high-powered enough to be scoring more than 42.5 points. What are you thinking on this matchup?
My guess as to what Vegas may have done here is Trent Williams went out with an injury, obviously the all-star left tackle for the San Francisco 49ers, and we talked about this pre-show. You do not see a total move from 47 to 42.5 very often. There's no key number there or anything, but it's a massive movement without a quarterback being out of the game, and that is not the case. My guess is, look, the Rams right now are 30th in pressure percentage for us. They have Aaron Donald, who I think is going to dominate rookie center Jake Brendel. No offense to Brendel. Everyone gets dominated by Aaron Donald, but their edge defenders have just not gotten home. Leonard Floyd's never been a great pass rusher. He's a great run defender and an average number 2 edge rusher in terms of pass rush. I think it's maybe Vegas not thinking the Rams are going to get home as often as we think, especially if Garoppolo gets rid of the ball very quickly, all those type of things. But on the other end of the spectrum, the 49ers are first in quarterback pressure percentage, have been killing opposing offensive lines. And this Rams offensive line is very susceptible against in pass protection, I should say. So I get where the number's coming from. I think I agree with you, but I also understand, divisional game, and then just, thinking both defensive lines have big mismatches. But hey, that's what these head coaches and Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan are famous for, is getting the ball out quickly, getting to their playmakers in space to go to work and create their own room. So I kind of see both sides of it.
One other bet that I liked this week was, it seems like an obvious one, but PFF Greenline season edge on over 7.5 receptions for Cooper Kupp. That's only at -142, but that's a 10.4% edge on PFF Greenline. So I'm kind of liking that one. Any props that you like in this game?
That's my favorite. I saw it earlier at 8.5 actually, and
I know.
I'm guessing it was plus. It was like plus 115. So I'm guessing I don't know, but they came down, but there's less of an edge because you're laying more money, obviously, with the minus odds. But yeah, I love all things Cooper Kupp. As I just mentioned, I think the 49ers are going to be in Matthew Stafford's lap in 2 seconds on a lot of snaps. But in my opinion, that just works in favor of Cooper Kupp being first in the progression, getting the ball out quickly, And I think Charvarius Ward, I don't know if he's going to shadow Allen Robinson, but their big ticket free agent cornerback in Charvarius Ward, who's had a great season so far. In my opinion, the only noteworthy corner on the 49ers. We've had some young guys playing pretty well, but nevertheless, I think his focal point will be kind of take Allen Robinson out of this game, take the deep passing like we're talking about out of this game. We'll let them eat underneath with Cooper Kupp all day long and just trust ourselves to hold them to field goals and things like that. And I think all of that works in favor of that prop.
Definitely. On the 49ers side, I'm curious to see if they can get George Kittle a little bit more involved in this game. He hasn't done a whole lot, obviously, this season because he's been injured, but I think that will be a key for the 49ers on offense. All right, well, that will do it for today's PFF Wire. Keep it on PFF.com for all of your news and analysis. Download the PFF app, subscribe to PFF Plus. That's $79.99 a year, and you can get a weekly free trial as well. Follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Follow me on Twitter at Doug Kyed. Don't forget to subscribe to the PFF Wire podcast on Apple or Spotify, or subscribe to the PFF YouTube channel. But that will do it. And for us, and we will be back with you guys again on Wednesday. And I forgot to do this again. All right, we will be back with you guys again on Wednesday.